So, for those of you who have not been in the area before, just to give you an idea where Smyrna, Izmir is located. So we take a satellite view. If you were by a window seat yesterday when you were landing, you might have got an aerial view of the area we're looking at. So you can see we're located at the head of a bay, the Gulf of Smyrna, Izmir. And the peninsula, today called Cheshme Peninsula, extends out to the west. And you can see at the tip of that peninsula is the Greek island of Chios. And so what I have marked there is Erythrai. And so although it's not a New Testament site, this is one of the sites that it is added in the new edition to Biblical Turkey. I think it's the place in the third journey return when Luke writes that they made portage at a harbor opposite Chios. And so I've suggested in an article that Erythrai is the port there that's mentioned in Acts chapter 20 as opposite Chios, so that's in there. So this is the aerial view of where we are at. So just a few backgrounds. So I'm going to do this presentation in two parts. First of all, just doing a general history and geography, and then more specifically dealing with the letter to the church here. So it's established as an Aeolian city in the 11th century BC. So we're going way back, a millennium in Anatolian history. It was one of 12 major cities to form the Ionian League. And we see that Ionia is an etymological equivalent of the Hebrew Javan, so son of Japheth, the son of Noah, that we find clear back in Genesis 10:2. And there's a prophecy in Isaiah 66 that God would send messengers to Javan to declare his glory, and representatives from these nations will return to Jerusalem as an offering to the Lord. And so this region then, at least from a Hebrew perspective, is Western Anatolia, the Greek version Ionia. As I mentioned, that the city is located at the head of the Gulf, and so we're inland here, about 35 miles, 56 kilometers from the Aegean. So the geographical setting here at the head of the bay. As we go out to Bayraklı later, we'll see the major port for Izmir. We'll pass that, and one of the major cities, the third largest city in Turkey today. So it's always been an important city now for some 3,000 years. Izmir is among all the candidates for the home of Homer, rises to the top as probably the one with the most credibility. So we see that from the life of Homer, and the people of Smyrna were the first to say that Homer was earlier called Melesigenes, child of the river god by that name, Meles, in their territory, and of the nymph Crates. And then again, some say, claiming they have proof that he was a Smyrnian, that his father was Mayon. They go on to say he was born on the banks of the river Meles, after which he was named Melesigenes. They say further that he was given to the people of Chios for service as a hostage and was thus called Homeros. So some of you went over to the museum and the fairgrounds yesterday, and you saw this statue of Homer that's on display there in this the Museum of History and Art that's there. There's actually, coming in from the airport, you maybe saw Homerus Boulevard as well. So the main road going up to Buja from Konak is called Homer Boulevard. So the city attaches itself very strongly to this tradition then that Homer was from Smyrna. So you can see from this older map where old Smyrna is, and it's at the eastern end of this gulf. And so this is where we'll be traveling to this afternoon and looking at the excavations that are going on in what is today the area called Bayraklı. So just a few images from the site, the things that we'll see there. The excavations have been going on for many years. One of the premier archaeologists of Turkey, Ekrem Akragol, was one of the first to begin excavations here. Back in the old days, when you traveled here about the only book in English was Akkergold's volume on the ancient ruins and civilizations of Turkey, which is still in print after all these years. And so he began excavations there, and so you can see the remains of the Athena temple. We'll see that as well. And a juxtaposition of somebody cutting grass with a scythe there at the site. I'll just point out that detail. It's quite interesting. No lawnmowers. This is the traditional way. So with the temple in the background. So, and Old Smyrna, again, going back to the first millennium BC, is destroyed now by the Lydian king Aliates around 600 BC. So we've got a destruction level roughly from that period. And so we're going to see the remains of these megaron houses then that date just prior to the destruction. This one you can see from the sign about the 2nd century. So the excavations were idle for a period of time. Just several years ago, our friend Cumhur Tanrı there was given the excavation rights, and he's begun to work there again. And so Cumhur Bey will be welcoming us to the site. And so it should be a very good visit. I doubt many of you have ever been over there. Has anybody on tour ever gone over there? Just a few of you. So we wanted to include it today as a possible extra place to visit when you come to Smyrna. So after the destruction by the Lydian kingdom, we see now a change taking place. And you can see on this coin the very famous story of Alexander falling asleep under the plane tree there, and the two twin nemesis approaching him. We have the Greek writer Pausanias, who's from the nearby city of Magnesia at Sipylum, modern Magnesia, just 30 miles or so northeast of here, writing, Alexander was hunting on Mount Pagos. So that's the hill we're going to see when we go to the Agora. And after the hunt was over, he came to the sanctuary of the Nemesis. Found there a spring and a plane tree in front of the sanctuary growing over the water. While he slept under the plane tree, it said that the Nemesis appeared and instructed him to found a city there and to move the Smyrnians from the old city into it. So the Smyrnians sent ambassadors to Claros. Now this is the oracle shrine just to the northwest of Izmir, straight south of Smyrna, to make inquiries about the circumstance, and the god answered, "Thrice, yes, 4 times blessed will those be who shall dwell in Pagos beyond the sacred Melis." So not much left of the Melis River. We'll cross that as we make our way to Vigraka a little bit later. But the tradition of the moving of the city and the refounding of it below the Acropolis. So this is the Mount Pagos from the Agora area that we'll be visiting later. And as you can see, from the top there, we'll see some other views in just a minute. So this is below Pagos then that the new city was founded, subsequent to Alexander. So you've heard the word Pagos before, and where was that? Remember in Acts 17:4 it says Areopagos, okay? So the hill of Ares. So Pagos simply means hill in Greek. And so today in modern Turkish it's Kaletekale, and so it's an area that's visited as well. They're trying to make it more tourist friendly on top of Mount Pagos. You see several things up there from the Hellenistic period. These are some of the earliest walls, and again this would be the Acropolis of the city, that are of course rebuilt subsequently from the city side. The walls you see are quite late, but on the back side you can still see evidence of some of the Hellenistic walls. So if you came in from the airport or from the south yesterday and looked up at Pagos and remember seeing the very large Mount Rushmore-like head of Ataturk off the side of the hill. So just across the valley you pass through the aqueduct. That aqueduct was taking water up to the top of Mount Pagos, which was the hill on the left as you pass coming into the city. So just to orient yourself from what you possibly saw yesterday. So this is what the aqueducts look like over 100 years ago. They've deteriorated since then, but there still is the restored aqueducts just to the south that brought water up to the cisterns on the top of Pagos or Kadipakali. So these are the remains of the cisterns on the city. And so these waters continue to flow into the agora today, and you'll see the remains of the fountain as we go down into the crypta porticus in that area. So this is the Tutku map of the city. So in your program books, you have the maps of each of the cities, marking the various ancient sites that are still extant. Many of those we'll be visiting on our tours. And so one of the things that the three western cities of the seven churches, Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum. So if you haven't heard this mnemonic device, this is what I use for students, how to remember the seven. We all know ESP, okay? Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, those are the three cities on the Aegean Sea. And then the four inland cities are ESP, TSP, L. So that's how I remember the names of the seven cities, ESP, TSP, L. So the ESP cities were all competing for the title of first city of Asia, and we'll see inscriptions doing that. Some of the graffiti in the agora that we'll see later also mention this. And so this tremendous civic competition that was taking place beginning in the Hellenistic period and continuing on. And so we will be, you can see where the theater is located. There's an excavation that's going on there. It's a little hard to show there. We won't be able to see it from the agora. The stadium on top of Pagos is where Polycarp was martyred. There's not much left there to see. The stadium up there. And then the theater that they're working on now with the hopes of restoration and beginning to use again. So this is the cavea of the theater, and so they moved a lot of residents that were in illegal housing in this area into different housing, and they're beginning to clear this all off. This is all the remains of the seats. They've been largely plundered and taken out, but the form location of the theater is very well known, has been since antiquity. So this is an ongoing project here in the city of Izmir to restore and revitalize use of the theater. And as you can see, it had a spectacular location looking out over the city below and out to the Aegean, or to the Gulf to the west. So this is a restoration of what it looked like in antiquity, looking from the Pagos to the top of the theater. You can see in the lower right, and you can see the inner harbor of the ancient city. So in your free time, if you have any, this is in the area largely where the important shopping area called Kemeralta is located. And today, the mosques that are around there are in this circular form. So when these mosques were built in a later period, this inner harbor still exists. Now this is all filled in. And so the only thing that you can have is from representations of what the harbor looked like in antiquity up until something like the 19th century. So this is the east gate of the city, called the Magnesia Gate. Ancient cities were oriented to major cities. Of course, the south gate would have been the Ephesus Gate. As we mentioned, Pausanias was from the city. We have two Magnesias in western Turkey, Magnesia at Sipilum, and we'll be driving through or around that when we come back from Thyatira on our tour tomorrow. The other was the Magnesium on the Meander, and we'll be driving through that upper Magnesia Gate when we enter Ephesus. So that's the gate that is oriented toward Magnesia in the Meander Valley to the southeast. So this is the eastern gate that led out across the Meles River and then to the road up to Magnesia at Sipilum. So as we move beyond the Hellenistic period and move into the Roman period, the Attalid kingdom, Attalus III, bequeathed his kingdom to the Romans in 133. There was a brief civil war, and then the province of Asia is established in 129 BC. So this is the first Roman province in what we call Asia Minor or Anatolia. Those are terms largely equivalent, okay? So there have been various population estimates of what Smyrna was. Rodney Stark has estimated a couple of different ones, 75,000, 90,000. Cadu, who has the first major monograph on Smyrna, estimated 100,000, and Broughton in his economic volume estimated 200,000, which is very high. And so the population estimate based on city size is probably closer to about 75,000 as we think about it today. And as Turhan Bey mentioned, one of the important 2nd century writers from the city was Aelius Aristides. And he writes in his orations about Smyrna all the way down to the shore. It is resplendent with gymnasia, agoras, theaters, sacred precincts, and harbors, beautiful works of nature vying with those wrought by man. There's nothing which does not serve both for ornament and for use. So Smyrna was really one of the most beautiful cities in antiquity. And it also was what's called a conventus or a size center. And so we'll see a map in just a minute how the province was broken down into a group of administrative districts, and Smyrna was one of the centers for that. So the courts that would be in session on an annual basis under the leadership of the Roman governor here would take place in the city of Smyrna. And so you can see the 7 churches there. And as you can see from this map, there are more than 7 churches. So we've got roughly, from the various sites in the book of Acts and the letters of Paul, something like 20 churches probably, or 20 cities that had at least house churches of varying sizes in the province of Asia. So let me just talk about nomenclature again, because you often hear people say the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Well, that's technically true, but Asia Minor is just a much more broader geographical area. So it's the province of Asia that these 7 cities are located, which is roughly the western third of what is today modern Turkey. But many other churches, so the letters of the 7 churches were probably more like circular letters. So for example, we know that near Laodicea there was both Hierapolis and Colossae, so the letter sent to Laodicea was probably read by these sister churches, just like Colossians was read. So here's the conventus districts that we have here. Should be 13 of them there, and we see that 3 or 4 of the 7 are conventus centers, so they're very important. Diochrysostom, and I have a long quotation in Biblical Turkey of the description of Apamea as why it was so significant as a conventus center when the governor visited there on an annual basis to hold his assize. This stone that's in the agora, we can't walk to it, it's just across the way. It's extremely important. It's stone, one of the earliest inscriptions we have in Smyrna, dating, depending on the interpretation, maybe to 126 BC, maybe earlier, or excuse me, later than that. And it lists the names of the Roman senators who voted to accept the province of Asia into the Roman Empire in 129 BC. It has to do with a land dispute also related to Pergamum that's being resolved here by the Senate. But this is extremely important, and you find this stone mentioned in all discussions of important Roman inscriptions or epigraphy. So, as we've heard, we're in a very much of an earthquake-prone city. The agora that we'll be visiting was rebuilt in AD 178 after an earthquake. And so the governors had, or the emperors had a very prominent role in providing funds through benefaction to the cities for rebuilding. And so Faustina, the empress, was honored. We'll see her image there, still in situ in the arch, there in the keystone at the agora here in Smyrna that we'll visit later this afternoon. Some of the inscriptions that we'll see there as well down in the basement mentions these earthquakes. And this old judge Democritus, famous for his skills, the success also belongs to you after the awful disasters of an earthquake. And so you can see the word in the red lettering, seismo. So we get our word seismos in Greek, earthquake, of course, into English seismic event there. And so we have the name of this individual who was a benefactor to provide money to the city for rebuilding after an earthquake and making the city out of Smyrna once again. So an inscription related to the earthquakes in this city. In an area that we probably will not see today, that they're still doing work on, you can see the remains of a bulletarian in the civic agora just to the west of the area we'll be visiting. Part of a mosaic floor there in the foreground area. This has been heavily rebuilt over the centuries, so the seating is all gone. But again, the place where the city councilors would meet in the bulletarian, of course, would have been a part of all of these Greek cities. And so this has been found in there as well. One of the recent discoveries that is down in Cameralta, Cenk took me to this site several years ago. We climbed up, went up an elevator to a lawyer's office to the south so we could look out over it. And when you're doing urban archaeology, this is one of the challenges, and we have the same problem in Antalya, wherever you start to dig, you've got remains underneath. So as they were tearing down a building in this area toward in the Passport area, Cameralta, they found the remains of a Roman bath that would have been at the tip of the circular harbor. And I'm not sure what the development of this is going to be, if they're going to try and seek to preserve it. Is it dried out now, you know, or is it still dry? But anyway, it's the groundwater level is very high, but this is the first Roman bath and it's been found here in Smyrna. So if we look about the beginning of Christianity, we see Polycarp in his letter to the Philippians is writing, "But I have not observed or heard of any such thing among you, in whose midst the blessed Paul labored, and who were his letters of recommendation in the beginning. For he boasts about you in all the churches, these alone that is, which at that time had come to know the Lord, for we had not yet come to know him." So as he writes to the church in Philippi, he is indicating that the church there was founded before the church in Smyrna. As I mentioned on the second journey, so it's probably while Paul is on the third journey in Ephesus that we see the beginnings of a church in Smyrna. So the historical sequence then that Polycarp is discussing would fit this scenario. So on the left, many of you have visited the ceramic shops in Ephesus, and this particular one is out of business right now, but they were making these beautiful ceramics of the seven churches. We helped them to design them, so this is very proudly on one of our walls in Antalya. It's a beautiful piece of art at the seven churches. Levent has helped to design another one. You perhaps saw this with the carpets here as well. So we're trying to show the seven churches in various plastic or art forms as well. So this is a lovely ceramic. So we see in Acts 19 on Paul's third journey, all the Jews and Greeks who lived in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord. So some Acts scholars think this is hyperbole. But as we look at the result of this extended ministry of Paul, this is probably the period then that the churches in some of the smaller cities like Pretoria or Philadelphia are founded in this period and during this time. And you know, the distance is not that great between here and Ephesus that Paul could possibly even come up to Smyrna and preach here, metropolis between these. So these churches that are in Asia, especially in the western part, are probably founded somewhere in this period, although we know the church in Ephesus was existing even before Paul came, so we don't know the name of the founder at Ephesus. And he writes in Romans 16:5, he mentions the name of the first believer in Asia, a man by the name of Epaenetus, who was the first fruits in Asia. Did that happen on the day of Pentecost? In Acts chapter 2, we're told Jews from Asia were in Jerusalem when the Holy Spirit came. Could it go back that far? We're simply not told the time frame in the New Testament when the church was founded. We know that there was a very strong Jewish community in Smyrna at the time. Cadu says there was a considerable Jewish community here during the imperial period. We do have literary evidence for Jews in Lydia and Phrygia around 210 BC, but for a bit further west here in Ionia, there's no literary text to that. We do have several inscriptions, one from dating to about 124, lists donors to Smyrna civic institutions, including in a very controversial phrase, ahoi pota Judaio. So those were formerly Jews. What this phrase exactly says has been a matter of a lot of controversy. We see a funerary inscription there that names Lucius Lollius Eustus, a secretary of the Jewish community, who had erected a tomb for himself and his family. So we have, in this particular inscription, very early evidence of a Jew having Roman citizenship in the city of Smyrna before AD 212, when it was more generally given. And then finally, another inscription mentions a woman by the name of Rufina, this dates from the 2nd and 3rd century, who was leader of the synagogue, the synagogus. So we see women in Asia Minor having much more role, not only in civic space, civic offices, but also in synagogue leadership here. So different from both in Judea as well as in Greece and Rome. So if you've ever been to the museum in Philippi, you can see this stele that's in the museum. They're mentioning one named Simon of Smyrna that's there. And simply from the name, Simon, it's believed that we've got a Jew being mentioned here who had come from Smyrna, now living in the community, connects to the text mentioning the synagogue of Satan in the letter in Revelation 2:9. The blasphemy of those who call themselves Jews and are not, but instead are a synagogue of Satan. So there's various interpretations of what this means. Gibson writes that what the dispute that is being mentioned here is among Jesus' followers with different stances in respect to food laws. So that's one view. Frankfurter says it's a constituency within the Jesus movement who are claiming the label Jew in a manner that John finds illegitimate. The view that is closest to mine is that by Phil Mayo, who writes, there's a close contextual proximity of the synagogue of Satan in 2:9 and the activity of the devil in 10b. So it argued powerfully that the so-called Jews were instigating civil persecution. So the Jewish communities were legal in the Roman Empire at this time, and so we're beginning to see what I think is what's called, those of you read Biblical Archaeology Review and Beyond, a lot of volumes dealing with the so-called parting of the ways, when followers of Jesus begin to separate from the Jewish synagogue. And so some of the tensions I think we see here are parting of the ways that's beginning here in Smyrna. And those Jewish followers of Jesus as Messiah now are being shut out of the synagogue, which again is more than just a place of worship, but a place of education, of hospitality, of community for Jewish people. And so for a period of time, the Jewish followers of Jesus were able to go there, but now the door is shutting. So we have reference to that here in the city. It's also a suffering church. So if you look in Revelation 2:10, do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. What the devil is about to throw some of you into prison so that you might be tested. And so we see the irony within these letters. So the believers in this city are poor in material things, but rich in faith. And of course the contrast is going to be Laodicea, which are rich in material things, but poor in faith. So Mark will be talking more about that later. And what's interesting in this letter is that this is one of the two, that there are no deficiencies that are mentioned by the risen Jesus in terms of their faith and practice. So the church in Smyrna is spared any words of rebuke. And so, as already been mentioned, Polycarp was a bishop, martyred around 155, 156 in the stadium on top of the Biblical Archaeology Society. And both of these are some frescoes that are in the Polycarp church across the street, which unfortunately we can't get in to see. So they have scenes of his martyrdom. You can see the lower one there where he's tied to the stake. They first try to burn him at the stake. The flames are quenched, and then they have to use a spear to kill him. And then about a century later, there's another famous martyrdom of Pionius. And of course, the martyrdom of Polycarp was one of the volumes you find in the Apostolic Fathers, that group of documents that arises in the late first century. Very important primary literature dealing with the early church. And so in a sense, it continues the book of Acts and the New Testament. And this is the sort of the prototypical martyr literature written to the Christians in Philomelium from the church in Smyrna, describing the story of Polycarp's martyrdom. And he wasn't by himself. There were Christians from other cities in Asia, especially with Pionius. We know some from Philadelphia were martyred as well. So the suffering church here that we see. One of the marvelous bronze statues that's in the Old Archaeology Museum is this bronze of a runner. As most of you know, bronzes are typically melted down, so very few complete ones exist, and the ones that do exist are typically found in shipwrecks and are preserved underwater, and then they're able to be restored and put into museums. And so at the end of these, each of the 7 prophetic messages, we see a promise. And the one to Smyrna is, I will give you the wreath of life. So notice I don't translate crown, I translate wreath, because this is what we're looking at. He has a wreath on top of his head. This is the wreath made of perishable materials, whether they're oak leaves or some other natural materials. And then you can see on the stele to the right, representations of wreaths there. So they could either be awarded to important civic personages or to athletes. Many athletes on their sarcophagi or on other types of funerary stelae will put wreaths there and even put the names of the games that they won in the various competitions within the wreaths. So, and again, going back into Paul's writing to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 9:25, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a wreath that wilts, but we do it to get a wreath that will last forever. So this metaphor of the competition from the games that everyone was familiar with in the ancient world, so the wreath then is a symbol of victory, and this is the promise that Jesus gives to those here in Smyrna. Now, we're going to the Agora. We're going to be hopefully able to see some examples of the Greek graffiti that was found here in the early 2000s. So for Latin graffiti, Pompeii is the place that has the greatest collection, but for Greek graffiti here in Smyrna is extremely important. And we have over 500 textual examples from the Agora in the lower area. These have all been published, incidentally, in a volume with Roger Bagnell, NYU Press, with comprehensive descriptions of all of these. And so, over a number of years, these have been inscribed both by locals and visitors as well, and we can tell by these. So in terms of the pictorial graffiti that we have there, there's 155 that have been identified, and 31 of those are either gladiators or combat scenes. So you can see the gladiator here in this particular panel that's among the graffiti. And it should not surprise us, but the most common pictorial graffiti there is of ships. And since this is an important seaport there, so sailors coming in to the city drew examples of ships or sailors here on the walls here in the Agora. Now, one of the most interesting groups of graffiti is called isosephism, and this is the ability to calculate names with numbers. And one of the categories of isosephism is isosephism of desire. And this will be introduced by a formula. I love the girl whose number is. So you could calculate your girlfriend's name with a number and then scratch it on the wall here. And so a couple of examples that are found here is one number 731 that they believe represents a name Antusa, and then 1308 with TK being suggested. So again, both in Hebrew alphabet and Greek alphabet, letters represented numbers. So we don't do that with our Arabic numbers today. So, but you could in both Hebrew and Greek. And so on the right here is depicted a Christian isosephism. And it's the sum of the words kurios and pistis. So some Christian calculated these, and he realized that both of them, the sum of the letters equaled 800. And so he writes as isosema, kurios 800, pistis equals 800. And so he inscribed this on the wall here. So this is one of the very earliest Christian examples of graffiti that we have in the world that's there. So both of these date to the late 2nd century after that earthquake in 178. So this was cleaned out, restored, and so that's the earliest dating we have from any of this. And but most of us late 2nd century, early 3rd century. And so we see examples then that the Smyrnians had a long-standing familiarity with this thing called isosephism. That is to calculate names with numbers. So why is that important to Revelation? So Revelation 13:18, it says, "Attention, wisdom is required. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. For is the number of person, his number is 666. So for us today, prophets or prophetic types and others have tried all kinds of names. I mean, in my lifetime, it's been between various Russian leaders, Gorbachev or Ronald Reagan even, and whoever. And most of it has been these contorted attempts to fit somebody's name as an equivalent to 600. It's not 666, okay, it's 666 for the calculation to work. And so most scholars think that the calculation has to do with the Hebrew reckoning of Neron Kaiser, and which comes to 666. So I lost my, there was not a dollar sign in Hebrew. So anyway, they didn't, the symbols didn't transfer over. But there's an alternative reading of 616. If the noon in Neron Kaiser is dropped, it comes out to 616 in some variant readings. And then in Greek, the name of Jesus calculates Iesus to 888. So usually this is the understanding of what 666 is being referred to in this particular passage in Revelation 13:18. And so we have this here in Smyrna. It again is an indirect archaeological verification of what we have in the book of Revelation is something that the first readers, the first audience were familiar with. So for us, 2,000 years later, this is just very difficult for understanding, but again, part of our visiting here in Turkey, getting into the 7 churches is beginning to understand the visual world of the first audience to better understand this document. So this whole idea, again, as I've said, is calculating the sum of each number to reveal a name. This is an example of this, of TK. Should have had this slide a little bit earlier, I apologize. And so this is a photograph from the volume that's been published. Another example of these Philo, whose number is such and such. And here's the other one that I mentioned, Lord and Faith, 800. A very interesting one that's been suggested as a possible other Christian inscription is the one who is giving the Spirit. So is this referring to the Holy Spirit? Is this Christian or not? There's some discussion whether it is, but again, it's quite interesting possibility that this could be a Christian inscription as well. We want to talk about the imperial cult. So Turambe mentioned that, but it's extremely important background, and all of our speakers, I'm sure, are going to make reference to this in their own presentations. So the first imperial cult temple was in Pergamum in 29 BC, and that was to Augustus and Dia Roma. And so we have the two Roman historians, Tacitus and Suetonius, making mention of that. There was a sanctuary built in 29 BC for Divus Julius and Dia Roma. Cassius Dio tells us about that. Now, for the second imperial cult temple, there was a big competition among the cities in Asia for the right to do that. And in AD 23, then, the Koinon decreed that we're going to build a second temple. This is now during the reign of Tiberius. And the Roman Senate had a competition where they reduced the number of cities who had the right. And the finalists were Sardis and Smyrna. And they awarded Smyrna the right to build this temple. So I think this kind of has implications too for why Sardis is addressed the way it is, because it had lost its luster, it lost its standing, and so here in the competition with Smyrna, they lost out because they didn't have the funds and the ability to maintain a temple, at least in the eyes of the Roman senators. And one of the chief arguments why the Roman Senate awarded Smyrna this right is that this city alone, even before it was in the Roman Empire, had supported Rome during the Punic Wars, and Tacitus mentions this. And so we begin to see coinage from the city of Smyrna mentioning these imperial cult temples. So we have a coin here that has a triple dedication to Tiberius, Livia, and the Roman Senate there, and showing a type of temple that there, and Tiberius and Antalya is standing in the temple on the location. So we do not know in Smyrna today where that temple stood. Obviously it would be down close to the Agora in the city center, but its exact location is not known. So this very important term, the Alcaris, that we find in Acts chapter 19, appears on inscriptions under Domitian, but not on coins until under Caracalla. And so Smyrna is awarded two other neophorites, one under Hadrian in the 2nd century, and then one under Caracalla. And you can see the coin at the bottom with three temples now that are again indicating, and again these cities, Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum, competing for the honor of having the most imperial cult temples. So it's a large competition. One of the inscriptions that you will see in the lower Agora mentions the name of a Neocorus here in the city of Man by the name of Claudius Aristophanes Aurelianus. And you can see his has the title Neocorus of the Semastone of the Emperor. And so this word again that we find in Acts 19 is being found in inscriptions here in the city of Smyrna. So when we look at Revelation 13, we see a very interesting text as it's describing the imperial cult there, the beast out of the sea and the beast out of the land. And there's reference to the earth's inhabitants making a statue or an icon of the beast. And notice it's repeated, God give breath to the statue, the beast statue might speak. and then ordered that those who did not worship the statue of the beast should be killed. And so this is, again, the reference to a cause of persecution that took place for Christians during this time. And so these statues, you go to the museums all over Turkey and you see statues of the emperors in one of these three forms. And this is what's being referred to in Revelation 13. These were usually painted. So most of the paint is off of these statues today, or they could be in bronze. Probably one of the nicest bronzes is of Hadrian in the Archaeology Museum in Istanbul. If some of you have seen that up on the third floor, that's one of the best that's in existence. So one of the three forms that the statues would be representing, he would be in cuirass form as a military conqueror. He would be depicted naked as a god, or he would be wearing a toga as a Roman citizen and father of his country. And so you can see examples of those three forms. There you can see him with his military garb on the left, depicted naked as a god in the center, and then here's the statue of Hadrian in bronze with his toga found in, that's now in the Istanbul Museum. So wherever you went in the Roman Empire, in these cities in Asia, you would see the emperor depicted in these three statue form. So I was in a conference in the Richmond Art Museum a few years ago, and they have a Claudius statue, and they began doing experimenting by doing recreations of putting purple and scarlet on that, depicting how the Emperor Caligula would have looked with his painted statue, because they had just enough paint on the statue to be able to do some restoration to suggest what the look of these. So these statues would be carried in civic processions. The loyalty oaths would be common, where they would have to swear obedience to the emperor. We have a very important inscription from Neapolis that's now in the Istanbul Museum as well. And notice that one of the main issues with Polycarp to save his life, he refused to declare Caesar is Lord. So this is the big contention of they were being asked to say, or to offer incense before the statue and then swear by the genius of Caesar. So refused to do these three things. And similarly with Pionius, the Neocorus is asking, surely you're aware of the emperor's edict commanding us to sacrifice to the gods. So this is the big complaint then with the Romans against the Christians. And so this pressure to offer incense before a statue of the emperor finally ends in 311 with this edict of toleration. So example of the loyalty oath from Claudiopolis, showing favorableness to Caesar Augustus. And again, we see this in Pliny's letter, the first non-Christian document talking about how early Christians worshipped. And so when Christians were brought before him, he asked them to repeat a formula of invocation to the gods and make offerings of wine and incense. And then he says, none of which things I understand any genuine Christian can be induced to do. And doing reverence to your statue and the images of the gods, he asked Christians to do that. Those who refused then were executed. So the image in Revelation 17, having to do with Dea Roma on Seven Hills. If you're in downtown Rome today, you still see her image over the city of Rome. Here she's the city on the scarlet beast, purple and scarlet, and sitting on the seven hills. And so this deity, the deity of Rome, was very important to the city. You see this coin from Vespasian with Roma seated on the seven hills there. Again, illustrating our text here in Revelation 17. The first temple, the Dea Roma, that we have here was built by Smyrna. So this is another very interesting connection that the Smyrnians had in 195 BC, again before Rome was part of the Roman Empire, and it was built to thank the Romans for assistance in resisting Antiochus III. They had athletic games. This is a coin of the city showing Roma, and the coin from Caracalla that we have in the lower right, probably the temple was split. Hadrian and Tiberius are added to the Roma temple like we have in the Artemis temple in Sardis today. So the Temple of Dea Roma, and again, we don't know where this particular temple was standing. There's no evidence of it today in Smyrna, but it was extremely important for the background to the city. We talk about the merchants of the earth in Revelation 18, the various commodities that they were carrying: wine, olive oil, fine flour, wheat, slaves, and then the ship captains and seafarers and the sailors. And we've already looked at the graffiti related to the sailors and the ships that are here. This is another image of the harbor that's there. Aristides talks about it as the city's navel. There, I'm running out of time, so I'll quickly go through this. Again, another restoration of what the harbor looked like in the ancient world. And then talking about commerce from this city. We see Smyrna was a magnificent city, broad and productive. Wines, olive oil, rice, purple dye, and spelt. And as was mentioned, that even in antiquity, the area was known for its fruit, the grain, olives, and figs. Wines were from this area too. And one of the important images that were found here, there was a very important slave market here in Smyrna as well. And from inner Anatolia at Ecmonia, slaves were sent through the Hermus Valley to Smyrna. And this marble relief that's now in the Ashmolean Museum shows a Roman soldier leading two slaves by a chain connected to their collar bands. So various types of commerce that passed through the city in antiquity. So a few concluding comments. Again, the entire book of Revelation, it's not just the letter that's significant for the Christians in Smyrna. Opposition coming from the Jewish synagogue, imperial cult of Dea Roma, and merchants and port workers. So did the church in Smyrna survive these challenges? Well, we know it did. Well, when Ignatius, the bishop of Antioch, writes a personal letter to the bishop Polycarp, the church is active here in the early 2nd century. And he also wrote a letter to the church here, naming Galvia, Arcavia, Alce, Daphnis, and Euctenus among its leading members. So past Revelation, we know that there was a church in Smyrna that has continued now for 2,000 years. Really about the only of this one of the 7 cities that's had a continuous Christian presence. And there, from a postcard from a century ago showing the tomb of Polycarp on the Cadifficale, the location of that is not known. That's disappeared, but that was in existence for pilgrims a century ago. So big thanks to Levin Laurel Tuku for sponsoring this global Smyrna meeting.